Hello, everybody. So good to see you again here for this third talk in this inaugural lecture series as part of the Global Humanities lecture series at Trinity. It has been a true honor and a true joy to accompany Burhan Sonmez in the first two lectures, and we are very much looking forward to this third one. It has been beautiful to accompany him on this trajectory or this journey that began like very early on as the anecdotes that we have heard, but I love one in particular. I love that one, Burhan, in which your brother sees you being very good at prayers and gives you a book of poems, right? And I love how you find in art a different way or a new model of like finding truth and finding the truth of what it means to be human, right? So in the first two lectures we have been basically like with Burhan alongside him, trying to like see how this category of the homo artifacts could help us find in art a model of truth. We have heard him lecture us on truth, the first lecture. We have also heard him on the category of beauty, and today, as you see, the lecture is entitled Sophia's Game in Art, and he will be talking about the category of like play in relationship to what it means to be human. One of the things that I see kind of coming out of this is that Burhan is actually giving us a common language or a common vocabulary or a common lexicon for actually bridging what often tends to be a very fragmentary world within the humanities, right? I think that our disciplines have something in common, but we share, like we lack sometimes, shared vocabulary for realizing that we're talking about the same thing. And Burhan, through this notion, this concept of the homo artifacts, or this figure of the homo artifacts, has actually given us this. So thanks so much, Burhan. And for those of you who are joining us for the first time, just to give like a very brief biography of Burhan Sonmez. Burhan Sonmez is a wonderful writer, a wonderful novelist, one of the most acclaimed internationally known authors who has been translated from more than 40 languages. He's originally from Turkey, as we have heard of his Kurdish origins. He's also the president of PEN International and also a human rights lawyer. So thanks so much, Burhan, and I give you the...
Tove Jansson's novel, The Summer Book, is about 6-year-old Sophia and her grandmother. Sophia's father is also present in the story while they spend their summer on a small island in the Gulf of Finland, but he is not particularly visible. It's based on true events. Sophia's mother has recently passed away. In the story that is full of trees, neighboring islands, and a cat, the girl's questions have no limits. But the grandmother's answers do have limits. She even tries to pretend to be napping, especially when it comes to the question about God and the afterlife. The girl, who doesn't give up on her questions, says that the place where God lives may be in a small box in a cave they have visited. God lives in a small box, maybe, she says. Sophia and grandmother wander around and explore the island. Exploration is also a reminiscence for the grandmother. They talk about Venice, where grandmother traveled when she was young. Although grandmother from time to time talks about other places she has seen, Sophia is more and more curious about Venice, which is sinking into the sea with each passing day. This is a chapter from the story. Quote, Sophia wanted only to hear about Venice, and especially about the dark canals that smelled of must and rot, and that each year pulled the city further down into the mud, down into a soft black slime where golden dinner plates lay buried. There is something very elegant about throwing the place out the window after dinner, and about living in a house that is slowly sinking to its doom. Look, Mama, said the lovely Venetian girl, the kitchen is under water today. "Dear child, it doesn't matter," her mother replied. "We still have the drawing room." They rode down in their lift and stepped into a gondola and glided through the streets. There wasn't a vehicle in the entire city. They had all long since sunk into the ooze. The only sound was the footsteps on the bridges, and people walked and walked all night. Sometimes one heard a strain of music, and sometimes a creaking noise as some palace settled and sank deeper. And the smell of mud was everywhere. End quote. This section, in which memory and reality are built with the words mud, sinking, golden dinner plates, and smell, is also an allegory of the grandmother's journey towards death. They returned from their dream city Venice to their current place, and the story continues. Now Sophia tries to adapt the story of Venice to their current place on a remote island. Quote, Sophia went down to the marsh pool, which was a smooth brownish black under the alder trees. She dug a canal through the moss and the mulberry bushes. "Mama, my ring has fallen in the canal." Her ring was gold with a red ruby. "Dear child, don't trouble yourself. We have the whole drawing room full of gold and precious jewels." End quote. After this scene in the story, where reality and imagination are mixed, Sophia expresses the ultimate thing she wants. Quote, Sophia went to her grandmother and said, "Call me dear child, and I'll call you Mama." "But I'm your grandmother," grandmother said. "Please, Mama, it's a game," Sophia explained. "Mama, shall we play You Are My Grandmother? I'm your dear child from Venice." End quote. The author is a soul that breathes with language. As language expands with images, signs, and allegories, play is its inner tissue. When a reality called the world is in front of our eyes, the wish to create other things is the continuation of the will to childhood play in adulthood. Play is not a way of underestimating reality, but a way of creating dialogue with reality. The play of a child who gives her grandmother the role of a mother in order to bring her lost mother back to life is an attempt to fill the void and complete the missing meaning in life. Although Sophia returns her grandmother to her current state, and then she expands the play further and says, "Mama, shall we play? You are my grandmother." Here they come back to reality, but there is now a framework of play in the background. It is as if her mother is with her, but pretending to be her grandmother for the sake of play. That is a new reality for the child. Zhuangzi, the ancient Chinese philosopher, one day dreams that he is a butterfly. When he wakes up, he doesn't know whether it's the human being dreaming of being a butterfly or if it's the butterfly dreaming of being a human. In the story, the little Sophia delves into the mind of Zhuangzi, as if dreaming while awake. She turns her grandmother into her mother. Play is not just entertainment. Grief can also become play, as in Sophia's story. The believability of play comes from its authenticity. It is like the believability of art. In play, the metamorphosis of reality into something else is the adaptation of humans to the universe of matter, whose basic dynamic is movement and change. While the movement in the universe indicates the impossibility of permanence, play, as a continuation of this, lightens the importance given to the momentary state of being. Existence is absurd because it has no fixed reality, and play is the organized absurdity developed against it. Play puts the body into limitless states, as it transforms harmony in bodies into disharmony. It transforms language into a body. Nothing can escape the power of play, not even God. As Sophia says in the story, God lives in a small box, maybe. Play is not the possibility of knowing time, but the possibility of possessing time. Its focus is happiness by being fixed in the present, not on being lost in the pursuit of the past or the future. Through the pleasure of repetition, play makes time infinite by establishing a mood of happiness and joy in a realm of its own. Art is also play, created by human being and immersed in adult seriousness. Adulthood perpetuates play through art. Art is not an escape from reality by returning to childhood play, but it increases the possibilities of reaching the truth with the help of play. Freud says, the opposite of play is not seriousness, it's reality. But we can also feel that play is a path to reach another kind of reality. Art is a form of recognizing the authority of fate as play and responding to it with play. Play is simplicity, where the beautiful and sublime are not concerned, where being here is in itself sufficient. While civilization attempts to reach the meaning of sublimity through religion, philosophy, and science, art, as an inner voice of the civilization, tries to soften this seriousness and dilute its weight. It leads towards the truth with the lightness of play and the simplicity of beauty. Art doesn't follow the main roads drawn up by religion, philosophy, and science. Instead, it opens up invisible paths. Since it's assumed to be distant from the spirit of truth, because it doesn't conform to the language of the conventional disciplines, art makes a different claim to perceive the truth and to create different realities. With the instinct of the child immersed in the depth of the play outside the power of time, adults look for an eternity against the absoluteness of death via the time of art. If God exists, it means they are playing a beautiful game to which sublimity is attributed. The absence of God means that human being is alone in the game, which provides freedom as well as helplessness. When he says that, oh, man is God when he dreams, a beggar when he thinks, the German poet Hölderlin deals with the strength and the weakness in human beings solitude, that is, the melancholy of being. This is a new photograph. A building had stood there for several decades and was demolished only last month. Years ago, one day, it was after midnight, they blindfolded me and took me down several floors underground in that building. Through maze-like corridors, screams were rising from all sides. Sometimes, when we passed by a door, voices would get louder. Finally, they put me in a cell 3 stories underground. It was a cell measuring 1 meter by 2 meters. There were 3 more people. They were a few years older than me, in their mid-20s. My first question to them was, what kind of torture were executed here? I was afraid of pain. They said things trying to calm me down. That was what they did to every new arrival. It was dark inside, the light in the corridor leaking in through the small grills on the door. We knew it was morning when the guards changed and the routine interrogation sessions began. There was a period of time between the change of guard and the start of the sessions, sometimes an hour, sometimes 2 hours. On the morning of the first day, I listened to the conversation of 3 people in my cell. Where should we run this morning? One of them asked. Let's go to Yıldız Park, and from there we can run towards the Bosphorus shore, replied another. Even though they spoke in whispers, their voices were serious. It was forbidden to talk in the cell. They whispered so that the guards wouldn't hear. Stand up, they told me. We lined up in a row inside the small cell and started walking in a circle. As we walked, they talked as if we were actually outside and running. Hey, look how the color of that tree over there has changed since last week, someone was saying. Oh, there are too many ships on Bosphorus today, said another. After a while, I kept up with them and learned to see things that were not there and to be surprised by what I saw that actually didn't exist. There was a journalist among us. One day, when the two of us were alone in the cell, the others were in session, he told me the story of Spartacus, a story that made that moment endless for me. There I realized that stories and dreams had become our only truth in the underground cell. 30 years later, I wrote a novel called Istanbul, Istanbul, in which I wanted to describe the beauty of the city. In a novel, not only what we tell, but also in whose voice we tell is fundamental. I decided to tell the beauty of the city through the voice of people in the climate of pain. In the novel, 4 people in a cell 3 floors underground tell each other stories to pass the time when they are left alone between torture sessions. All stories are related to the beauty of the city above ground, a city that they cannot see, yet only dream. In the stories, there are Charles Baudelaire's poems, melancholic love songs, and little games. This is a page from the 2nd chapter of Istanbul, Istanbul. Quote, Uncle Küheylan held his fingers to his lips as though he were smoking a cigarette and took a deep drag. Then, exhaling like he was blowing out the smoke, he leaned his head against the wall. As he was taking a drag of his make-believe cigarette, he turned his head towards me and our eyes met. With a completely straight face, he mimed the action of taking his cigarette case out of his pocket. He offered it to Demirtai and me. For a moment, I was taken aback, but I didn't reject his offer. I made as if I were taking a cigarette paper from the tobacco case in his empty hand and placed a few strands of tobacco in it. I realized that Uncle Küheylan was not fantasizing, that those events in his head had really taken place. It was obvious from all his gestures that he thought the cigarette between his fingers was real. Uncle Küheylan was also being serious when he said that this cell was Istanbul. As far as he was concerned, there was no such thing as unreal. Feeling no need to go outside, he brought the world inside, transcending place as well as time here. So this cell was Istanbul, and there was cigarette smoke everywhere. It was like not wanting to wake up from a beautiful dream. We were regressing to our childhood. At that young age, I never felt those things were like a game. However, years later, when I was writing these in a novel, I felt like life was a game and people were players. I consider this the melancholy of being. The tragedy within the play and the play within the tragedy is the melancholy of being. Art, established with the language of play, is both the acceptance of this melancholy and an effort to overcome it. In this respect, art is not fun play, but serious play, and this seriousness includes fun. Religion, through the emergence of civilization, is a major play in which humanity constructs itself. In this area, where life is subordinated to itself with limits, the temple, palace, and school are built as the body of belief over the human body. If play is the body's possession of free rhythms, art enriches this freedom of play with artistic polyforms. The freedom of art is frightening because it goes beyond the boundaries of any power, the palace, the temple, the school. And the fact that throughout civilization it has been belittled on the one hand, and on the other hand, it has been restricted and molded and policed, reactions that testify to the potential of art. Art is the power of rejection within the human structure. by saying art is a daughter of freedom. Friedrich Schiller points out the playful character of art on the path of freedom, which is not bound to reality or any of its institutions. And he carries on. Art has to leave the realm of reality and with proper audacity elevate itself above simple need. End quote. Plato says in the Laws, quote, God alone is worthy of supreme seriousness, but man is made God's plaything, and that is the best part of him. Therefore, every man and woman should live life accordingly, and play the noblest games, and be of another mind from what they are at present. Life must be lived as play, playing certain games, making sacrifices, singing and dancing, and then a man will be able to propitiate the gods and defend himself against his enemies and win in the contest. Play here is the life form, so end quote. Play here is the life form of human being, who is the shadow of the sublime in Plato's universe. And it is the assurance of civilization. The ambience of happiness derived from art as play invites people to the ideal form of living, dreaming of outside of the cave while being inside. Let's recall that scene. Sophia went to her grandmother and said, "Call me dear child and call you mama." "But I'm your grandmother," grandmother said. The child who lost her mother wants to call her grandmother mama in play. It is a way of creating happiness in a new reality. When her grandmother rejects this game, Sophia, instead of retreating from the game, deepens it and sets up a game within the game in order to achieve happiness and says, "Mama, shall we play? You are my grandmother." Just as in play the child defies the distinction between reality and play, so we immerse ourselves in a work of art without distinguishing between the made-up work of art and reality. Reality there, too, has an arena of freedom that is not limited by daily needs and expectations, as Schiller stated. The play that creates riddles within riddles is a serious endeavor. It is a response to the absence of ultimate form that human being wants for itself. Like children's creativity in play, the creativity of artists is not to belittle reality, but to perceive and construct reality in another way. As Johann Huizinga points out, when life play and seriousness were viewed as two separate moods, and when idiocy and sanity were pitted against each other, the power of play and its authenticity were ignored. Quote, the later Middle Ages tended to express the two cardinal moods of life, play and seriousness, somewhat imperfectly by opposing folly to sense, until Erasmus in his Praise of Folly showed the inadequacy of the contrast. End quote. Art as an act of play carries in its bosom the longing for the purity of childhood. Innocence is the spirit of art as well as of childhood. It is the innocence of the good in the face of evil, of the weak in the face of the strong, and the innocence of life in the face of death. Mona Lisa stolen from the Louvre Museum and Marquez's book stolen from the printing press also carry the serene power of innocence. In order to tame sublimity in nature and in life, art must leave the realm of daily reality and establish a different realm of reality. In this new realm, space is different and time works differently, and a new sphere of being is presented, just like in play. Why are we in our time now? The past duration of time is 13.7 billion years since the Big Bang. and it is uncertain how many billion years will pass after the present moment. We don't know why we are at the exact point in time where we are now, but we perceive that we are in our own present time. Levels of existence were first explained through consciousness. Then the state of sleep or dreaming was added to this, consciousness and dreaming. That is also a way to comprehend existence. Then the transitional phase when falling asleep, a kind of twilight sleep, was added to this. Like these three modes, the concept of time too reflects the three basic modes, which are past, present, future, or yesterday, today, tomorrow in daily life. While novelists try to explain that the past, which is thought to be known, is actually unknown, philosophers emphasize the unknowability of tomorrow because tomorrow is an infinite future. Wittgenstein says in the Tractatus, "It is an hypothesis that the sun will rise tomorrow, and this means that we don't know whether it will rise. There is no compulsion making one thing happen because another has happened. The only necessity that exists is logical necessity." Since the propositions and conclusions of philosophy on time lie heavily on the soul of the person who is the victim of daily life, people try to create different time modes and reshape the language for this purpose. For example, in the Kurdish language, a new layer is added between present and the eternal future. When counting the days, after counting yesterday and today, we call tomorrow 3 times in Kurdish. We say tomorrow, second tomorrow, third tomorrow. Sabah, du sabah, se sabah. And after that, it is infinity. Just as a twilight mode is added between the waking and sleeping modes of existence, in the daily classification of time, 3 tomorrows is added between today and the infinite future. It is like how the future tense is grasped in childhood. When you say you will do something tomorrow, the child perceives tomorrow as now and wants it immediately. Are we there yet? This is their favorite question. Actually, it's rather a wish, wanting things to be here and happening right now. While human beings decompose the present and the past into pieces and produce new meanings from there, especially through art, they also try to shape the future time and handle it according to new modes and classifications. Jean-Paul Sartre explored this matter in his essay On the Sound and the Fury, Time in the work of Faulkner in 1957. He criticizes William Faulkner, saying that Faulkner doesn't open a future for his characters in the story. Rather, he presents a closed future. Quote, "It is immediately obvious that Faulkner's metaphysics is a metaphysics of time," he says and continues. "For him, as for all of us, the future is closed. Everything we see and experience impels us to say, this can't last. And yet, change is not even conceivable, except in the form of cataclysm. We are living in a time of impossible revolutions, and Faulkner uses his extraordinary art to describe our suffocation and a world dying of old age. I like his art, but I do not believe in his metaphysics. A closed future is still a future." End quote. Sartre's criticism of Faulkner's metaphysics of time, with its emphasis on fatalism, stems from his perception that the future of the story there belongs to the eternal future space, not to the 3 days tomorrow mode. Faulkner's metaphysics is different from the philosophical metaphysics of Wittgenstein, who said, "We do not know whether the sun will rise tomorrow." By counting the future, tomorrow, second tomorrow, third tomorrow, Faulkner makes it a part of today and yesterday, and leaves what comes after that to the infinite future. God cannot change the past, because the past is over. But long before psychoanalysis, art dares to touch where God cannot reach by dealing with the past, breaking it down and rebuilding it, and in this way art shapes the web of causality that weaves the future. This is what Faulkner tries, playing with time. Art unifies time by including the past and the future, while play does so by excluding the past and the future. This is the point where art and play diverge, but in the end they both, in different ways, arrive at the same place. They stop time by fitting it into an absolute moment. Schopenhauer calls this absolute moment the present and reflects his distrust. Quote, "The greatest wisdom consists in enjoying the present and making this enjoyment the goal of life, because the present is all that is real and everything else merely imaginary. But you could just as well call this mode of life the greatest folly, for that which a moment ceases to exist, which vanishes as completely as a dream, cannot be worth any serious effort." End quote. In my previous novel, Stone and Shadow, I told what happened to an old man in prison who didn't trust the present time. This was an event that actually happened. Quote, "The other day, a friend told me about an old man in Diyarbakir prison and how he lost his touch with reality day by day after being tortured there. Soon he was telling his cellmates that they had all actually died and were now living in hell. 'This prison is hell,' he said. 'We are dead, and these guards are the hellhounds.' The younger cellmates tried to convince him otherwise. 'Okay,' they said, 'but what about our relatives who come to see us on visiting days? Aren't they real?' The old man said they were relatives who came to cry at their graves, and that they had a false impression of really talking to them. Sometime later, they released the old man. He couldn't believe it. 'Since when were you ever let out of hell?' He was terrified, and on the day he was to be set free, his heart stopped." This story was about a new reality created like a game, but got to a tragic border in real life. It was extreme, and there was no way out. This play reminds me of another play written 600 years ago. Iranian poet Jami wrote a poetic story called Salaman and Afzal in the 15th century. And when Edward Fitzgerald translated into English in the 19th century, his fame in the Middle East also reached this part of the world. This is a sub-story told in the prologue of the story. Is human being a powerful God or a helpless creature? While questioning this, Jami gives an example of a Kurdish man who came to the city from the desert and felt puzzled. The story goes like this. Quote, "O God, is it me or is it you?" says the narrator. "If it's me, where does this dignity and wisdom come from? If it's you, then what is this abject impotence? I feel like the Kurd of the desert." A Kurd left his desert for the city. He saw a city full of noise and clamor, agitated people, back and forward running, right to left and left to right, life anxiety everywhere. Kurd, when he beheld the turmoil, crept aside and, travel-weary, intended to go to sleep. "But," he said, "how shall I, in all this chaos, know myself again on waking?" So, by way of recognizing, he tied a pumpkin round his foot and turned to sleep. A trickster who heard him crept behind and removed the pumpkin off the sleeper's ankle, tied it round his own, and went down to sleep beside him. By and by, the Kurd, awakening, looked directly for his signal. Seeing it on someone else's ankle, cried aloud. "O man, who are you and who am I? If that is I, why is pumpkin on you? If it's you, where is myself?" While aiming to combine the imaginary world of art with the real world of the viewer, unexpectedly the viewer becomes a part of the new reality that takes place entirely in the imaginary world. In chapter 14 of Moby Dick, Herman Melville writes, "Nantucket, take out your map and look at it. See what a real corner of the world it occupies." He tries to take the reader out of the imaginary world of the book and into the living world, and in fact brings them face to face with the world of known maps and directs them back to the world of the novel. Nantucket of Moby Dick cannot be known by looking at Nantucket of the Atlantic Ocean. Melville in chapter 55 says, quote, "I shall add long pain to you as well as one can without canvas, something like the true form of the whale as he actually appears to the eye of the whaleman. It may be worthwhile, therefore, previously to advert to those curious imaginary portraits of him, which even down to the present day confidently challenge the faith of the landsman. It's time to set the world right in this matter by proving such pictures of the whale all wrong." End quote. Examining many examples from India to European galleries and scientific books, Melville comes to the conclusion that a painting that accurately reflects the whale he calls Leviathan cannot be made. Quote, "The great Leviathan is that one creature in the world which must remain unpainted to the last." He describes the inadequacy in representation. He carries on. "True, one portrait may hit the mark much nearer than another, but none can hit it with any very considerable degree of exactness. So there is no earthly way of finding out precisely what the whale really looks like." End quotes. He is so sure of what he says, and in chapter 56 he states that even he cannot make a realistic picture of a whale, and says, "I couldn't draw so good a one." Knowing that he cannot draw the whale as a copy, Melville creates his own whale. This is both a play for him and a way of creating something beautiful, as he takes the reader on an ocean voyage in pursuit of the world's most original whale by constantly reminding the outside world, "Nantucket, take out your map and look at it." He feeds the mind-imagination state of reader and weaves a living world piece by piece. His Leviathan is full of connotations, and at the same time it is a blank wall. The reader feels the sounds, smells, and shapes of what is described, becomes a part of the journey promised in the novel, and longs to travel beyond this journey by wondering about each new wave behind every wave, the new island beyond every horizon. Melville creates another version of reality in Moby Dick by combining the language of play and beauty. The white whale is like God, who never dies, but we cannot stop asking questions about it, and we can neither do with or without it. Captain Ahab attacks the white whale with the fury of humans abandoned to their fate in this world. God is closed art, while human being is open art. It is sometimes confusing to understand whether God lives in the white whale or Captain Ahab, because they change places frequently. God is humans' desire to solve the problem of existence, not to understand it. For humans who didn't know a continent beyond their own territory, truth was the other side of the horizon. When they came to the ocean shore after exploring the continent, the truth was the unknown beyond the ocean. As they turned their faces to the sky after exploring the earth, the truth was in the space of endless stars. The white whale is on the edge of the discovered world, like Don Quixote, who attacks everything, distressed that his time is up. The white whale attacks because its space has been taken and the world descants upon it. The situation becomes confused. Is it actually the white whale's or Captain Ahab's space that has met its end? Or, as some critics state, is the space of God in question? God was the name of a utopia whose existence was desired. From the moment that humans began to call themselves I am, they also took on the burden of achieving utopia by themselves. God is the unattainable utopia, while human being is attainable utopia. God is complete, human being is incomplete. Being is therefore a vertigo and makes one both happy and melancholic. The mixture of a smile and sorrow on Mona Lisa's face is the depiction of that state of being. This is like the expression of yellow laughter. When I read Boccaccio's book, The Decameron, I laughed a lot, like everyone else. I was surprised by this because in the Decameron, a group of men and women escaping from the plague epidemic that devastated Florence stayed in a house in the countryside, telling stories to pass time for 10 days. And these stories were often full of humor. I thought a lot about this need to laugh on the edge of death and pain while writing my novel, Istanbul, Istanbul. When 4 people in a cell waiting for their turn to be tortured tell each other stories about Istanbul, they not only emphasize beauty but also use a lot of humor. This situation is called yellow laughter in some parts of Turkey. In the novel, one of the protagonists says, quote, "Doctor, all the stories you told us from that book of the Decameron being funny reminds me of something about an island. According to the customs of that island, when someone died, everyone congregated in the home of the deceased and wailed and lamented until the middle of the night. Then everyone went back home. Then once the family members in the house of mourning were alone, they would start talking and laughing and telling funny stories about the deceased. With each story, they would explode into laughter, and as the stories went on, tears would roll down their faces. They call it yellow laughter. They think yellow is right color for laughter that makes people forget death. What do you say, doctor? Do you think it's their need for yellow laughter that makes the noble ladies and gentlemen in the Decameron tell funny stories when they can feel death breathing down their necks?" End quote. We know that life is lived with the reality of being towards death. But knowing death doesn't limit humans to blues and fear, because humans have humor as well as art and philosophy. We know that death is waiting us ahead, but we have life right now and here. And we desire to be oriented towards happiness and joy, despite the distrust expressed by Schopenhauer. This is the last page. The plant waits stationary. The animal goes, returns, and waits. Human being, on the other hand, destined to move, gazes towards infinite spatial distance and doesn't wait when they reach the horizon, but always heads for the next horizon. Waiting is the acceptance of repetition, like trees shedding leaves and growing green again, or animals dying and being replaced by new generations. Waiting may be the best way to live simply for us, but human being wants to find, learn, and do something new, and for this, they long to reach beyond. Carl Gustav Jung, Swiss psychiatrist and thinker, mentions his uncle in his essay on Ulysses. Quote, "I had an uncle whose thinking was always direct and to the point. One day he stopped me on the street and demanded, 'Do you know how the devil tortures the souls in hell?' When I said no, he answered, 'He keeps them waiting.'" The devil was in hell, whereas God was in this world and kept humans in the same way, waiting for death. Reason was the freedom to choose and act between good and evil. With this power to reason and the inspiration of their imagination, humans intended to risk godlessness and to perpetuate their own existence in nature. Not waiting was their condition. Human being was not only fortunate to exist, but also a victim of existence. For besides being the only living thing conscious of their existence, they also bore the weight of sensing the meaning of absence. They knew the limits of their ratiocination and therefore depended on their imagination, which was limitless. Even though we knew what blue was in our minds, we could only show it with a thing in real life, with a fabric, a flower, or a bird. Plato's idea could only be understood in the world reality to which Aristotle was committed. The idea of God was a longing for the abstract blue. With the dissolution of the theological halo, the center of existence descended from heaven to earth and shifted from God towards humans. Blue was sought on earth, not in the sky anymore. Even though epic philosophy tried to find the truth by colliding wrong thought with the right thought, the essence of thinking was its potential for polysemy, richness, and reproduction. Philosophers, like artists, could be understood by the power of their thoughts to open new doors of the mind in every age. If there was one right, it couldn't be said that the rest were wrong. That is what philosophy and art showed us, that truth can be defined and described in different ways, like the truth of beauty and play. And the story will continue next week. Thank you for today.